Welcome to you. My name's Peter Mook. I'm on the Alumni Council, and you will have noticed we introduce all of these sessions with somewhat of a scripted set of remarks, so forgive me if I sound stilted. I want to welcome you to this session on championing community colleges. It's hard to say, isn't it? And it's been a great day, and I hope you'll stay with us till the end of the day. There's another breakout session and then a nice reception. There'll be a wonderful poster session of student activities that you heard about. You should really try to get to that. I went last year. I was very impressed. The campaign that you've been hearing about, one of the priorities is student scholarships. It's very important. If you have an interest, look for the table in the TC Fund. And another priority is reestablishing connections with Teachers College, which is why I'm now on the Alumni Council. I was a student here, and then I taught economics here for 10 years before Tom Bailey. And we've known about each other for all these years, and we met today. So this is a treat for me. And if you have any questions about the Alumni Council, if you would like to get more intimately involved, ask me or anyone with a yellow tag. That'd be great. So, as I said, this session is on community colleges. It's a really important part of our system. And Liz Willen from the Hechinger Report is going to moderate the session. And I'll let you introduce your speakers.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to see a classroom somewhat filled with people interested in the topic of community colleges, because the people on my right and on my left, the persons on my right and left, are people who have really helped influence my thinking in terms of how and why community colleges matter. But I have to say, it's an uphill battle trying to get people to pay attention to community colleges. As a journalist, I run the Hechinger Report. We're a nonprofit, foundation-funded website. We write about education. We're based here at Teachers College, but we are independent. And our stories run in news organizations all over the country and the world, from NPR to The Atlantic. We are one of the few news organizations in the country that actually writes about community colleges and cares about them, because they really do educate more than half of our country's students. And I'm always curious as to what makes people come out to hear about community colleges, because in my many years as a journalist, I was not only not encouraged to write about community colleges at mainstream news organizations, I was discouraged. And I was told once that these are not the institutions that people care about. They want to know about the Ivy League schools and the high-end schools. And yet, I have learned, and Tom Bailey here, who's been very influential in my thinking about this, that these are places that are not only the economic engine of our country, but that do such an amazing job with so few resources to educate the students who need them the most and get the least. Before I introduce my panelists, I'm curious, did anyone here attend a community college? Please raise your hand if you did. That's great. That's more than I usually see at panels, and that really matters a lot. So the people who are going to set us off here, who start this off, will be first Tom Bailey, he heads the Community College Research Center here at Teachers College, and he's worked with my organization over the years to help train journalists to write about community colleges. Perhaps no one has researched these issues more thoroughly or has a greater understanding of the many needs that community colleges have. And when I say get the least, in terms of philanthropy as well, the three of us all share something in common, that it is part of our job to convince foundations, donors, and others that what we do matters deeply and they should support the work around community colleges. Also not an easy task at all. Tom is also the author of a book that I highly recommend if any of you are interested in community colleges. It's all about redesigning community colleges. I've read many of the chapters, and it gives you a great overview of what some of the issues and problems facing community colleges are. So I'm going to start with Tom, and then I will introduce Karen and let her talk a little bit about the fantastic work she's doing at LaGuardia Community College. Tom.
All right, thank you. Welcome. Just those of you who went to community colleges, raise your hands again. So which ones? No, you start here.
I took some classes at community college. Somerset County.
Okay. Yeah.
Went to Westchester Community College.
Okay.
for my associate's degree.
Okay.
Monroe Community College in Rochester, New York.
Great institution.
Yeah.
I just was there. Well, and I've been to Westchester many times as well.
There was
So
one more.
I know there was somebody else. Two more.
Monroe Community College.
Another Monroe. Okay. Yes.
Everett Community College, north of Seattle, Washington.
Okay. Been there too. So. Just want to say that, so I'm the director of the Community College Research Center. We are celebrating our 20th anniversary. And I want to say that, you know, as I assume most of you were TC alumni, and it's been, I really think that we probably couldn't have done what we've done without the particular environment that we have here at Teachers College. As Liz said, I think that, that probably, if you look around the country at people who are studying higher education, and especially 20 years ago, I think they probably felt that, you know, studying community colleges was a career killer. It was considered a narrow niche. You know, if you studied, I don't know, the psychological development of Stanford students, it would be, you know, you were a broad education researcher. But if you studied community colleges, it was like a little side issue. Despite the fact that, you know, 45 to 50% of the undergraduates in any particular year in the United States are at community colleges. And I think our CCRC was started really by the Sloan Foundation. Somebody at the Sloan Foundation sort of had the insight that, hey, half the students are in these colleges, and one, you know, probably somebody actually went through the higher education journals, counting the number of articles about community colleges, and I think there were 4% that were mostly about community colleges and 7 or 8% that mentioned them. So I think he sort of saw this and he said, okay, let's start a community college research center and put it at a research university, at a Research One university, Columbia University, to sort of make a political statement that this is a legitimate scholarly pursuit, and that's great. And there's been no question there's been a huge change in the 20 years that we've been here. But I totally agree with Liz. I think it's still, I think if you go to the Association for the Study of Higher Education, which is the main higher education, you still don't see that much work on community colleges. So anyway, I just want to say you should be proud of the institution that you went to, because the support that it's given to us, and I think it's really allowed us to you know, to be a voice for community colleges and for the importance and significance of community college research. So I just want to say that. Now, you know, community colleges are not only are they, of course, very large, but at the same time, they're over-representations of most of the types of students that, you know, that at least in an ed school we're concerned about. I mean, there are definitely more low-income students in community colleges, minority students, especially Hispanic students. African-American students, it's a little bit different because of the historically black colleges, which tend to be four-year colleges. So there's not a big over-representation nationally of African-American students, but outside of the South, where the HSBCs are concentrated, there is that concentration of it. Community colleges were really set up to open up access to higher education for a broad group for really everybody as much as possible. They're local. Some states have rules that say, or policies that say there must be a community college within 2 hours of 90% of the population, something like that. I'm not sure that's the right detail, but some policy of that type. They're cheap. The average, I mean, in the world of $60,000 college, which is what we now think. The papers think if you go to college, you have to pay $60,000 a year. Average community college tuition for a full-time student for 2 semesters is $3,700. Most community college students do not have debt. So once again, it's not, see, these are institutions that don't fit the sort of mold of everybody's drowning in debt and they can't afford colleges. So I think that's something else that's important to think about. So in a lot of ways, community colleges were successful at opening up higher education. The large majority of our students in this country now have some contact with higher education, and I think community colleges can take much much of the credit for that. So in one sense, they have been very successful institutions. And also from a point of social policy or equity, they're also successful. Now, if you think back when we started 20 years ago, there was not a lot of criticism of higher education. Now there's a lot of criticism, right? 20 years ago, there wasn't criticism. And basically, the idea was that our higher education system was great. We were the best in the world. Everybody came to study with us, and that was true for a certain slice of our higher education institutions. And in fact, they are great, et cetera. But the problem was with the whole narrative of higher education was completely dominated by those institutions. So if you think about this, if higher education equals Harvard, Harvard is the best country, is one of the top 5 institutions in the world. So higher education in the United States is great. So there really wasn't that much criticism. What was the most controversial issue in the 90s about higher education? Affirmative action, which was a question of who gets in. Of course, that was irrelevant for community colleges because minority students already were overrepresented there. So I think that's an important thing to remember. Sometime in the 90s and maybe the early 2000s, 2000s, people started to say, well, wait a minute, there's a whole lot of diversity in the higher education. There's some institutions aren't performing as well. We got national graduation rates for community colleges, and there were some community colleges that had graduation rates in the single digits. 3 years, if you tracked a cohort for 3 years, only 10%. The national number was about 22% actually completed an associate degree at the college where they started within 3 years. So as in the last 15 years, there's kind of been a realization that, well, wait a minute, community colleges did open up opportunity. They gave a chance for people to go, but what happened to them after they got there? That was something which we hadn't really thought about, and we hadn't thought about it because of the sort of aura of excellence of our higher education system. So that's really, I think, starting in about 2003, 2004, we've had something called the completion agenda, where there's much more focus on trying to get students to completion. So I think that's an important aspect that you have to remember when you're thinking about community colleges. Now, so what is the issue? Well, the first thing you have to remember is, I said that community colleges are open institutions. They pretty much take anybody with a high school degree. 60% are judged to be not prepared academically to start college level courses. And many more come from low-income families or families that are first-generation college students, so they don't have a bunch of uncles and aunts and parents and siblings and friends who are telling them how to be successful in college. So you get the students with the greatest problems, and of course, you also get the least investment in those students. So of all the sectors of higher education, community colleges spend the least on each student, on the full-time equivalent student. But since most community college students are part-time, it's not just full-time equivalent. That full-time equivalent is 1.5 people. So those people actually probably need more services than a full-time student sitting in a dorm that's surrounded by other students. So you have a problem, right? Yes, it opened it up. Yes, we attracted all the types of students we want to attract, but no, we didn't invest. And what about the escalation of the cost of college that you've heard about? It's going through the roof. Community colleges per student spend less now than they did 15 years ago on an inflation-adjusted basis. So actually, in general, that's true of many colleges, and although not the elites. So you have not much investment in them, or less than in other institutions, declining investment, and at the same time you have students who have the most serious problems. So that's really confronted us with the situation, and that's kind of why we wrote this book. And we also noticed that while there was a tremendous amount of reform, there wasn't a lot of progress. If you looked at the graduation rate for the sector as a whole, it's been very stable, low and stable, despite the fact that there's been a tremendous amount of reform. Why was that? Why do you have a lot of reform that doesn't seem to move the needle? I think there's 2 reasons, and then we'll talk about what those reforms ought to be. One is they're often too small. I think this is This is a typical type of reform in education that we have, I think, in other sectors, although I'm not an expert in that. So you can go, I think you go to any community college and you'll see many different initiatives and reforms that are taking place. You go to the American Association of Community College Conference, you can go to 100 or 200 sessions talking about these reforms. But often there are 200 students. So that can be really successful, but what about the other 19,800 students in the college? So despite the success of those 200 students, the overall performance of the college isn't affected at all, or it's just rounding error. So I think that's one issue that we have. We can do reform at the margins so that it looks like we're changing things, but we really don't have to change the way the institution operates. So I think that's one issue. The second issue, I think, is that often those reforms were one segment of the student's experience. So remediation is the best example, I think, because most students need it, so you think, well, let's really do a good job, because if students don't get established in college, they're never going to finish. So that's true. So we've done reforms of remediation, and we've found that, yes, we can get those students into college-level courses at higher rates, but if we follow them for 3 or 4 semesters, those benefits fade away. So it was an issue that we can't just, it's not an inoculation solution. We can't inoculate a student this semester and then not change anything else and expect that to be successful. So those are two issues. I mean, we can talk in more detail about the
And we're going to
kinds of
offer
things.
you guys
Yeah.
a chance to ask a lot of questions too.
So-
Great, thanks, Tom. That's a good overview. And when we get on the remedial education issue, that is huge. It is what I've been on many panels with Tom about. It's so often is the issue that sticks, that prevents community college students from graduating. They just get caught in remedial math, they can't pass, they give up, and it's really very, very sad. And Tom's done a lot of work towards thinking about how we might revamp remediation so this isn't the case. And also, just to put this in a little bit of a greater context, we don't know what's going to happen with the next election, obviously. It's craziness in terms of the education agenda. But one thing that President Obama has really pushed is this college completion agenda, the idea that it really matters to get more Americans to and through college, to get them some kind of a degree or a certificate, and that's where community colleges have played such an important role, and why they really can't afford to have their students stuck indefinitely in remediation and not getting to and through college. So here on my right, Karen Dubinsky, I had the pleasure of meeting her on a visit to LaGuardia Community College right here in Queens, which is one of my favorite places to visit. It's fascinating. Students speak how many different languages?
120, they come from 150 different countries and speak 120 different languages.
Think about that, 120 different languages, 150 countries. It's an absolutely amazing place when you go and see the energy there and talk to some of the students and listen to the president, Gail Mello, and just fight so hard for relevancy and to keep that institution alive and thriving. So Karen is what's known as the Chief Engagement Officer there, and she is a person who has a degree in medieval studies, which is a very interesting launching point for her, and an MBA for the work she's doing at LaGuardia. I met her there, but also was introduced to her through a program that we wrote about. That it was one of my favorite stories that the Heckins Report has done. It was about a program she started called the Pushy Moms, and Karen had the gall to match up some of these Upper East Side moms who have spent lots of time with their kids in private schools, focused on getting them into the absolute most elite colleges. These are not women who have ever been anywhere near a community college and would shudder at the idea of their offspring attending one. And yet, after all the energy and an effort they have put into getting their kids into high-end Ivy League and other types of schools, which might involve thousands of dollars in tutoring and consultants that cost maybe $35,000, $40,000 a year to brush up their kids' resumes, they have managed to really get their way, work their way into community college by helping some of the LaGuardia students. And that's just one of the many ways that Karen has worked with community college students there at LaGuardia, and some of the innovations she's had in getting attention to this sector. So Karen, tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing there and why it matters, and how you've gotten the idea of getting the community involved in community colleges.
Thanks so much, Liz. I first of all, thank you all for being here. I'm very honored to be here. I'm such an outlier. I'm caveats first. I'm here with, the preeminent scholar of community colleges and a forefront, someone who's in the forefront of journalism about this. It's a very new world to me. I'm not an educator. I'm really not a development officer, although I work in institutional advancement. I came to this as a marketer and an entrepreneur, so I started to see community colleges in a very different vein, and I'm thrilled to be at a place like LaGuardia that supported and encouraged a vision to do something different. And I know we spend a lot of time bemoaning the terrible state of community colleges and how everyone ignores us. It's an opportunity because, when you're down so low it looks like up, or as a marketer we say, oh, what a great gig. All you have to do is slice the bread and you've won. So little things matter such a lot. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about community colleges. I know about LaGuardia, they're so appreciative for any of these kinds of things. So I came to this totally as an outsider. A friend of mine who was on the board invited me to a benefit. And I saw these students from all over the world, dressed up for the first time, speaking to an audience. If this was a Goldman Sachs thing, and the people in the audience, and English is not their first language, they made themselves get up there and speak to us. And the bravery and the grit and the courage that I saw in these students to do that made me want to help. And I said, I see how smart they are, I see how hardworking they are, but no matter what their skills are, unless they learn to navigate an outside world, they're not going to get hired in that world. People aren't going to listen to them, and people aren't going to give them money because it just feels like an alien world. So I started by I created a group called the President's Society, where I took selected students who showed real hunger and ambition and leadership potential, and we trained them in how to speak and how to dress and how to interview, and I brought in people from the outside to talk to them. The only thing I ever knew about development was that if you want money, ask for advice, and if you want advice, ask for money. So we asked for advice. And I knew people in business. I'd worked in corporations as a consultant for many years. I said, just come in and share your experience and talk about how you navigate the workforce and what some tips for success are. Because as Tom said, they don't have role models to do that. Well, all of a sudden, people started coming in and going, God, these are great kids. What a great place this was. And I realized that the communities that fuel philanthropy, that fuel jobs, that fuel the high-end economy in New York City anyway, don't give a damn about community colleges. They never heard of them. If they did, their perceptions are somewhat negative. And if you want to connect to that world because you want money, you want jobs, you want connections, well, in branding, the first issue, there's two issues. One is awareness, and the next is familiarity. So they have to know who you are, but they have to connect to you. How do you open pocketbooks if you haven't opened any hearts? So I don't ask for any money. I just say to people, I've got some students who would love to hear what you have to say. Or I go to Travelers Insurance and I said, could we bring, I met somebody from Travelers, the most wonderful man. He said, what could we do to help? I said, could we just bring our students in to meet some of the people who work there and see what a corporate office is like? Great, that's an easy ask. And I have a product. I have students who know how to dress and know how to talk. They've never been in a building like this, but they're game for it, So we brought about 20 students into Travelers Insurance, and I asked him to find a panel for us of people who work there who would come out of a community college system. And guess what? They never thought of it. They had 20 of them. And they did a panel of 4 or 5 people who our students could relate to, who came from all over the world, went to community college. They sat down with executives. I invited faculty to come with us too. 6 months later now, I just got a call from the people who run the foundation at Travelers saying, we'd like to include you in our internship program. We've never worked with your students before, but we were so impressed at how they handled themselves. And we have some openings, and we would like some interns for LaGuardia. So one step would lead to another, and it connects a lot of circles of communities. Gail Mello, the president of LaGuardia, has a wonderful saying. She said, we have so few resources that everything we have has to do double duty. So everything I think of is, how do I bring new opportunities to students? How do I open doors for new kinds of philanthropists who don't know about community colleges to know about us? And how do I connect ongoing programs to let our faculty and staff open up their doors to bring the community into the classroom? There are so many opportunities, and because nobody knows about us, and once they do, what great workers those are. How interesting to bring some of those people in. I've met with people at the major museums that have been spending, millions of dollars on McKinsey studies that tell them, we need diversity in the arts. Well, we could have done that for less money. So all of a sudden they want programs, and well, let's hire community college students to bring in 4 of their friends every week. And all of a sudden the color of the institution starts to change. I find I don't deal with foundations, it's too hard for me, but I do deal with individuals and corporations, and I have found 9 out of 10 times any door I've knocked on has opened to say, I'd love to meet your students, I'd love to know who they are. One of the rules of doing that is to make it easy for people. Institutions and academic institutions especially have their own rules of how things go, and as faculty in these institutions, you have a lot to cover. You have curriculum to cover. You have lots of rules. Doing this work means bending rules, because I need to do things. It's like my customer is the external person. So I say, when would you like to come to a classroom? And he says, well, I'm free Tuesday at 3:30. I've got to run around and find a classroom at Tuesday at 3:30, and a professor's going to tell me, no, I'm covering, the history of civilization 3 then, I can only do it Thursday. I said, no, you have to do it today. So this is what part of the challenge that I go through, that I'm sure you deal with all the time. But people want to come in and teach a class. I do something called Take a Student to Lunch. Just, what is New York business about? Let's go to lunch. How many of our students have ever been out to lunch in New York City? I said, not fancy, go to a pan quotidian, go. And I get business executives to take a student to lunch. I said, it's not to be a social services guide, it's to talk about success, about navigating the workplace. I'd say half of those relationships have become ongoing. I know someone who takes one of these students to a new museum 3 or 4 times a year. They've invited them to their homes for Thanksgiving dinner because they're foreign. All of a sudden, so many more people know about our students and about community colleges, and that's how I'm measuring success right now. Although at the same time, the number of donors, the number of money, the number of high-end donors has all increased exponentially, and I think that's going to continue the more we can outreach in all kinds of ways.
Karen, that is so interesting and encouraging in so many ways, because it goes against what we've been talking about earlier, is that the many, many challenges of getting people to care about community colleges. Tom and I do deal with foundations, and
we should get together. You
yes.
you do the corporations, we'll do the foundations.
But you have to really spend a lot of time, as you initially talked about, getting foundations and others to understand that the research you do, the work you do around what happens at the community college level matters in the larger scheme of higher ed. That is a dance as well. And you've been doing it now for almost 20 years. Karen talks about how she really connects with the people, taking students to lunch and getting them to see how interesting and important these kids are and how much they really matter. How do you convince the sectors that you deal with that this research matters in the greater scheme? One thing that's important to remember is that things have really changed. There are 3 major funders of research on community colleges. The federal government, they weren't that interested in the 90s. Lumina and Gates, 2 foundations, didn't exist in 95 when we started. Sloan, who started us, has other interests, so we actually don't do anything with them. I do think that as a research, foundations tend to like to do things. They want to, be able to talk about concrete things that they've done. So it's difficult to convince them that you also have to understand what's going on. I think they do understand that you need to evaluate what you do, and I think that's, of course, and we do some of that as well. But you have to have a foundation of knowledge and understanding about the institutions for you to design the program that you are then going to evaluate. So I think that's basically the thing that I've been trying to do for 20 years,
which is convince foundations that they need a foundation of knowledge about the institution, which they don't have in general. I mean, they think they know about the high-end universities because they all went there. They certainly don't have a knowledge because, as I think as Liz pointed out, most people think. I mean, I lived in Scarsdale, and I think this, any student from Scarsdale High that went to Westchester Community College is like, well, what's the matter with that student? I mean, why aren't they going to a real college? I mean, that's the kind of attitude that we have, and it's been a struggle to convince foundations that, in fact, these were institutions where they really ought to be investing money. Now, I think we've done that successfully, and there's now much, much more interest than there were 20 years ago, and I think partly our ability to provide that underlying understanding and knowledge that they've had has really sort of helped out in getting college foundations to do that. Now with the book, we actually do have the kinds of models that we've had in this book. There's probably several hundred colleges around the country that are sort of using this to try to strengthen their student success. And I think the foundations have been very supportive of that and funded many of those reforms as well.
It's great, and as I said, it's a challenge, and these are both people who are doing a lot, not only to meet it, but to think about student success in these institutions. I would welcome questions from the audience, and I would like you to, if you don't mind, if you have a question, to get up and introduce yourself, say who you are, and please phrase it as a question. Thank you. Please, go right ahead.
My name is Christopher Inga. I teach at Monroe Community College. I have heard very good things Tom said and Karen about community colleges. Do people know about all that?
No.
I teach at that school. I know what you're saying. Many of the students could get admission at the Ivy League school, and they would do well. They're bright students. What is the perception? What is the snobbery about those colleges? Community colleges are wonderful. Tell me what we can do to clear out this snobbery look from high school students, from people who should know better.
And from the Scarsdales of this world,
What
Tom.
can be done to get rid of that negative perception?
Well, I think that the one problem is that not that I want to say anything about journalists, but I think
I agree.
But also professors. So I mean, who is it and journalists, professors, in public intellectuals, policymakers, all of the people who are setting the tone of discussion about higher education. Almost all of them struggled to get into the most selective and elite colleges, and felt if they didn't get into 20 institutions, they were failures. So those are the people who are setting the tone of discussion about higher education. So it's really not surprising that they, had they gone to one of those colleges, they would have considered themselves failure. Now these are the people that we've entrusted with setting the tone of discussion about higher education. Now I think that the examples that you give, that is exposing students or having students get to know these folks, I think that's extremely important, and that's always eye-opening. What? They can talk. They can, we can carry on a conversation. These are really interesting, ambitious, intelligent people. So I think that it's a process that we have to go through. I do think it's improved. I think that we're a lot better than we were. I mean, the whole emphasis that the Obama administration has put on community colleges. Clinton didn't have anything to do with them. There was no interest in the Clinton administration for community colleges.
Will there be in the next Clinton administration if there is one?
I don't, what can I say about that? But I think that's important. And I do think we've made progress in that.
I want to let Karen give a crack at that.
I want to come at it again as a marketer. You really can't just go out and change people's attitudes. You give them the tools and positions so they change their own attitudes. One way is sampling. You bring people in and let them meet as many students. The other are the kinds of stories that you put out. And you have to put out stories that play to what people already think. You can't just change perception. So I try and put out stories about students who have transferred to Ivy League schools. LaGuardia has 38 students at LaGuardia at Columbia. I don't talk about it's the School of General Studies, and then they go, oh, look at that. So we talk about the students who transfer to schools that people know about. I also talk a lot about immigrants, because there are no expectations. So when they meet students who have come here, who have been in this country for less than 5 years, taught themselves English, got jobs, are now putting themselves through school without their families here, that's impressive to people. And that starts to change the perception right away about community college. And it's a topic in the news today that people want to take a stand on and show that they support this vision of America. And I found that to be a very compelling story to tell people.
I taught 35.
Do you want to introduce yourself? And
Pardon me?
can you introduce yourself for us?
Yes, my name is Ellen Seymour, and I'm retired from Nassau Community College. And I taught there over 35 years. I'm not even sure how many, but a long, long time. And I have to say with complete honesty, I hope that it has improved a great deal. But this reputation didn't come from nowhere. We didn't see a tremendous graduation rate of people who entered. I taught in what became the communications department, speech. I taught public speaking. And many of our students were not really capable of producing a speech. I think that those who are willing learners certainly learned well in my classes. And I love teaching there when I had good students.
But you know, that's again, I'm a marketer, so I have to go back. You don't market everything that you have. You select what you market. So if right now, to change perceptions, you market your top tier of students, that's what you do. And the benefits you get will dribble down.
I've never said an unkind word except today.
No.
I never, ever admitted to anybody that there were students in my class who needed remedial help, which was what I was
Of course there are.
confronted with. But that was the truth.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very good point you're making.
Well,
But we also had a nice number of students who went on to top SUNY system schools and with very top grades and got quite a bonus for having these top grades.
so just, I mean, I not from the marketing perspective, or at least from the perspective of understanding what's going on. I mean, it's, I think that students arrive at community colleges facing a lot of barriers, and that's not their fault. That's the part. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think that's and I actually, one of the things one thing I admire about many people in community colleges is that they say, well, these are our students, we're going to do the best we can. I mean, there are some people who say, oh, if we just had a good high school system, we could do a great job. So I don't think they generally say that. But I think it's important to remember what the context is and the resources that are given to the colleges.
Community college is to do your best with what you have. I mean, not everybody goes to Harvard or Columbia. And I think you're supposed to do your best with what you have. And many people rise to the occasion. And I was hoping to hear today is that we're doing even better now than we were doing then.
Tom will have the statistics. I believe they are better. But, bringing the community into the school, I think, is a big help to students as well. If, graduation rates, there are financial issues. We raise money to deal with those. They're academic. We're trying all kinds of new advising systems. But the other issue is engagement. And when you can give students hopes and ideas and paths for a future, to new opportunities and bigger worlds and more people who they think understand them, I think it builds a resilience to deal with the exogenous circumstances. It should be. I think bringing in new people to create new opportunities should be something that helps.
Somebody else has a question there.
Yes, please. You had one also right here. No? You want to hold on?
Well, my name is, oops. My name is A.E. Dreyfus, and I actually just left CUNY after 20 years. And I actually did a 5-year review of a freshman year program, which was a summer remediation course. You know, how the students do who went through the program in 6 weeks remediation, which was free as opposed to having taken a remediation course in the fall. And students did much better on a shorter program, and they had bonuses in terms of...
What was the name of that program?
This was actually at New York City College of Technology, and it was funded by Central CUNY. But I'm picking up on what I believe you said earlier, that after a certain amount of time, there's a drop-off. So there's a need to support the students past that first semester. Yes, they did okay. Then what? They're still not getting the whole common parlance social capital to be able to really do well and end up graduating. So I'm sort of asking, you know, what would help? I mean, obviously it's a full program. It can't just be this little piece and that little piece.
So, well, actually, there's the concept of navigation, I think, is really important here. Community colleges are very complex institutions from the point of view of the student. They're more complex than Columbia is from an undergraduate's perspective. They have many more programs. They have all sorts of different degrees, certificates, associate degrees, associates of science, AASs. And then if you want to transfer, which the large majority of community college students want to do, then you can imagine this sort of explosion of complication. I mean, you can probably take the subway to 20 four-year colleges in New York City. So if you want to transfer, and the requirements for those different colleges are, you know, different. So it's extremely, it's very difficult. So one of the questions is, how do you help students sort of navigate that complexity? And that's, I think, a crucial question. I mean, I think looking at trying to navigate the external world is also crucial about that. But also there's an internal world that's complex, that's difficult to understand. And one counselor to 1,000 students isn't going to do it. So I do think that there's a lot of reforms in the structure of the colleges that are helping students get through kind of more efficiently. I mean, excuse me?
One piece of it.
Yes. Yeah.
There was a question right here and right back there. Go ahead.
Yeah, this question is actually a follow-up on what you were just talking about. Dr. Bailey, in your recent book, Redesigning American Community College, you call this a career map, and basically, instead of just sending a kid in a massive program of hundreds of options, we actually give them like a clear image of how these classes all align with the greater curriculum. Not only how do these classes connect to the program you're in, but how do they connect to learning objectives that you're going to use out in the labor market? And you call this the guided pathways or the career pathways approach. And so I'm wondering, in creating these career pathways or these career maps, what role does the local economy and really local labor market conditions, for example, a lot of community colleges will have like a nursing program. And so it may be good practice for that community college to say, how is nursing as an industry growing in our local community? Because in community colleges, you have a lot of local students who like to stay locally after they graduate. So it makes sense to construct your programs to be reflective of your communities. So I'm wondering how does labor market data like this fit into your guided pathways approach?
It's a great question for an economist. We forget that that's what Tom's background is here.
Everything you said, I agree with, right? No, I think that the colleges that are doing the kind of guided pathway model, which is this, I mean, we contrast in the book what we call the cafeteria model, which is the current situation where everything is there, It's just that it's including all sorts of services, counseling, other kinds of things, career counseling, that's all there, but it's up to the student to find that as it is in a cafeteria. Actually, somebody said it was better the food court model. At least the cafeteria has like a line. I mean, the food court is all these islands of things around. So I think that colleges that are doing that are trying to provide more information. I mean, one of the points is that in most community colleges, career guidance is something that happens at the end, when in fact it should happen right at the beginning, because how is it that you're going to choose your program if you don't have some kind of goal? Now, recognize that people change, but nevertheless, we have to do that. And one of the pieces of information that has to be provided is what are the jobs, what kind of job do you want? Are those jobs available here? Do they pay $15,000 a year? In which case you won't be able to pay off even the small loan that you have to get at a community college. Now, I think an interesting thing is we have a new college here at CUNY Gutman, and they devote a year to two courses really to help students figure out what they want to do. And in those courses, they have students do research on potential careers, in which case they will definitely look at the labor market information. So I think that's one thing. Other places, if you go, let's say, to the website of the Chicago City Colleges or other Sinclair or the other four-year colleges that have done that, you can find easily available information on the types of careers that are available and what sorts of salaries you can expect to earn of those locally. So,
Question back here. You guys are forgetting to introduce yourselves.
by the way, are you from a college or what are?
I'm going here next semester. I founded a company which works in adult ed, and we develop solutions to get this kind of data in community colleges.
So I have a question for you.
But you have to introduce yourself, sorry.
My name is Brent. I've been a student here. I work in New York. So over the past 30 to 40 years, especially during recessions, we're seeing almost requirements inflation for entry-level jobs. For a job that used to require a high school diploma or an associate's degree now requires a four-year degree, not because of the subject matter, but just because it's something that the market will bear. Do you see that as a trend that's going to continue? And how are community colleges going to compete in an environment when entry-level employers are expecting a four-year degree?
Well, I do think that there's an increase. I mean, we certainly have lots of examples of occupations that used to be, I mean, an associate's degree would be appropriate for them. I have a friend who's a president of a college in Detroit, and they used to have like associate degrees for design, auto design, and now those are BAs. So, I mean, we can argue about whether it's necessary or not. I guess I'm a little bit less convinced that it's all, empty escalation. But I think that what has happened in colleges now, in community colleges, is a much greater emphasis on transfer. Because that's fundamental. I mean, 80% of community college students say they want a bachelor's degree. 15% get a bachelor's degree after 6 years. And that, there's a lot of problems, there's a lot of issues where that is, but that has to be improved. And those of you at CUNY know we've had this very controversial Pathways program that was fighting for 3 or 4 years in several lawsuits. And that's, I think that kind of reflects the difficulty of the issue of trying to make it easier for transfer to happen. But I think that whether or not those are necessary really or not, they are necessary for the student because that's the way they get their jobs. They need to be able to have a much more efficient transfer system.
And Karen has spent a lot of time working on the transfer issue as well.
Well, also jobs. What we've been doing is one of the ways that we've been encouraging philanthropy is people who have connections to different industries. A woman just sold a big travel agent. We have a travel agency. We have a travel and tourism department. She went to 10 companies, including the Chatwell Hotel, the Gansevoort. She said, these are students who you don't usually hire. They're what would be an equivalent of a freshman and sophomore in college. She said, they should be hired, but they need to make $15 an hour. I'll put up half the money if you put up half, and you try them out for a 240-hour program. We now have 10 students in major travel firms around the country. The donations come to the foundation, we administer it, and 12 students and hotels who never would have hired us And travel agencies are seeing the benefit of bilingual students, students who have diversity, and they're contributing to the economy. We're doing the same thing in the insurance industry now. We've started to get a foot in. So I think these are public-private integrations and partnerships that can help make that happen. And again, I still feel it's introduce students into that world and let them see who they are, and they might start rethinking what kind of degrees and attitudes and whatever are necessary.
Peter has a question.
Well, I think actually you've been talking around the question.
Yeah.
But basically it says, you talk about the emphasis on transfer and the number of community college students who's 80% of them said who want to get a four-year bachelor's degree. And I can see this tremendous advantage. You get the benefits of a four-year degree at a cut rate price because the first 2 years will be relatively cheap. But what is the research showing us of the value, and you've sort of touched on it, of just doing the 2 years and then entering the market, or dropping out with even less? Do we see some value added for those students?
The research on wages, if you get an occupational degree from a community college, the returns are very 15, for men it's 15 to 20% increase in earnings, for women it's over 30. Now, I know that's partly the nursing.
With just the 2-year degree?
With just in occupational areas. If you take a general studies or a human, liberal arts transfer-oriented degree, it's not worth very much. So if you take those types of degrees, you'd better transfer and get your bachelor's degree. But as far as the occupational degrees are concerned, those are definitely valuable both for the individual and for society in terms of, obviously the individual doesn't pay all the cost because their tuition is much lower. They get a good benefit, but even if you take account of the entire costs, which society has to pay, the state government or wherever that money is coming from, that too is certainly a good investment if you finish and in an occupation.
You have to have the degree.
Yes.
Question here.
Sure, yeah. I'm Jamie. I am a master's student in the higher ed program here at TC. And I'm also a graduate research assistant for the New Jersey Council of Catholic Colleges, which represents the New Jersey system. And this is sort of a general question. I think we've touched on it a bit, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about sort of the national discourse on making public college free, and is that the right discourse to have? Should we be thinking about allocating resources in other places? And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but what is the best use of sort of scarce resources? Is it making college free? Or
Good question. Who wants to tackle that one?
I'm wondering in the discussions that you're having with, does that come up?
Well, it does, but it becomes way too complicated, so I sidestep it because they say, well, don't the students get Pell Grants, so isn't it technically free anyway? And I go, well, yes, but then you have foreign students and undocumented students, and they go, how many of those do you have? I said, we don't ask. And it leads into conversations that as a marketer, I don't want to have. I'm glad it's part, again, of a national discourse. People just see that community colleges are part of a federal agenda and being talked about, and that's positive. But I avoid all conversations about the details of it.
I'm going to let Tom tackle it, but I have to say I've been listening to Bernie Sanders talk about how he wants to make all college free, and as somebody who's in the midst of paying 2 4-year college tuitions, I have to say I don't like to take sides on things, but boy, would I love to have
that
those tuitions.
That resonates with you could send your kid to community college. I think I'm somewhat divided on the question, and I do, and of course the Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton argument really has to do with making it free, but shouldn't the rich have to pay? I mean, why should we forego the money that people with more means could actually afford to pay for colleges? I mean, that's kind of the issue. Now, my perspective on this is, I certainly think it's important to lower the cost to the student. The experience in Tennessee, which has a free community college system now, although it's a system where the student has to take advantage of all the existing financial aid, including the federal Pell Grant, and so it's called a last dollar. So if anything is left over after that, the state will make it free. Now, the criticism of that is that the students who are poor and eligible for a Pell, 100% of Pell, they don't benefit from that because they already have that. So that money is actually going to sort of somewhat higher income. I mean, not very high, but somewhat higher income. But what they've found out is that many students who would have been eligible for Pell are now applying and going to the community college who wouldn't have before. So it's kind of a messaging argument. It's one thing to say, hey, it's free, come on down. It's another thing to say, yeah, well, if you fill out this 116 question, application and get financial aid, then it's free to you. So I think there's that aspect to it. I mean, I'm somewhat divided. I'm an economist, so economists tend to want to have high tuition, high aid, rather than having no tuition. So, but I think the other point, which I think is important, is that that those reforms, that the models of free community college, which the president emphasized when he announced this, Tennessee and Chicago, in both of those cases, and also the Long Beach Community College in California, in both of those cases, the free tuition was part of a much larger reform agenda. And so I think that's crucial. In both of those cases, the free part came in late after there was a lot of other reforms. I mean, we basically had free community colleges in California for many years, and nobody looks back on that as like the golden age of community college education. And that was because, if you go back there and you'll see that the student success measures were just as bad, or weren't much better than they are now. So I guess I sort of punt on that and say, yeah, if you're going to do it, but it's not going to work if that's all you do. And it has to be incorporated into a much broader reform agenda. And if you want to know what that is, you can read our book.
Probably have time for one more question. Was there someone who was? Go ahead.
This is more for you, Karen. So there was a law passed in 2014 called the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. And this said that any community colleges that receive federal funding for adult ed, they must be, A, working with these kind of career pathways approach that I mentioned earlier, but B, they must be working with local communities and creating local linkages, not only with employers, but the parents and other parts of the community. Would you say that this law called WIOA has any influence on the way your institution has approached community partnerships?
I've never heard of that. It's not something I'm aware of. I said I'm approaching it because I think it's the right thing to do for the community and for the college, but it's not a legal prerequisite.
I will say one sentence about that. It has some influence, but it isn't a major factor in any functioning of a particular community college. It's kind of a side issue, and in that it's operating, but it isn't part of the fundamental functioning of the college.
Would you say it's fair to say that this national or federal pressure is kind of being applied on the state and local levels? And so while you may not have explicitly heard of it, I've kind of been seeing community colleges, less than 10% of their funding, I believe, comes from federal sources. So of course they shouldn't be driving this kind of conversation directly. But for me, when I think of WIOA, I kind of see it symbolizing a broad-based movement to kind of have this kind of community. And it's only K through 12 education as well, not just higher ed.
What I've seen happen much more, again, are private-public partnerships to create work skills programs. We've done something with Cornell Weill that said we need this kind of coding done and we can't find anyone to do it. And Harvard Business School went out and found Cornell Weill and funded a project for our continuing ed program to train students to go do this. But it wouldn't have happened without outside private perspective. I'm a believer in that.
You've been waiting so patiently.
And we just started a program for food studies.
For food studies, students?
Food studies, because we happen to be located right next to Bronx Terminal Market. So we're making use of the resources that are literally down the street from our campus. They're 2 blocks down. That's one of the biggest places to import food into New York City. So
that's a great point, and I believe LaGuardia at some point had a training program with Fresh Direct which is right there too. And that is, again, part of the conversation of the other major role community colleges play. And I will also say that community colleges, and Tom mentioned Macomb Community College before, that's outside of Detroit, they get a lot of new scrutiny and new attention in an economic downturn. There was a lot of discussion and pressure on community colleges to come up with innovative programs and ways to create jobs, and especially the retraining of the auto industry and lots of other ways. So the Hostos example is a tremendous example.
And Hostos is the closest community college to the Community College Research Center, so we feel like we have a particular connection to that.
I have to say it's been a pleasure being in a room full of people who are interested in community colleges and have asked such great questions. So I'd like to give a round of applause for my panelists. And another suggestion, pick up Tom's book. It's available on Amazon.com, and just a great way to synthesize a lot of the many questions and issues that you've had today.
And actually, Sarah brought down these, and so she would be mad at me if I didn't mention that we have our newsletter, which just came out.
There you go. And finally, since I've been live tweeting some of the discussion, not being rude or multitasking, I would also recommend that you all sign up for the weekly newsletter at the Hechinger Report, Hechinger Report. Our stories appear all over the place, but if you sign up for our newsletter, which is really easy to do, I just tweeted it and I can tell you how to do it too. Every week you will get important stories on topics that you won't read about elsewhere, such as community colleges. So, thanks again.